Hey, Cody. So one thing that I've heard a lot of people ask about if they're renting right now is kind of that push to maybe buy a house and start building equity in something. It's like you never know when the right time kind of for that is. Are you throwing away your money renting, or if you're missing out not building equity in a house that you can either sell later or kind of use it to rent out, or whatever you kind of want to do with it. So we're both renting. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about why you're still renting rather than just jumping into, buying a house.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that I don't own a house yet, the reason I haven't really gotten into that, and I've looked, trying to find some good deals, but right now we're in a seller's market, not a buyer's market. It's really high. The house prices are pretty high. The interest rates are low, but when I do the math, it doesn't make sense for our budget. My wife and I like to stay within that 25 to 35% of our take-home income as for housing. And so our rent's perfect for that right now. But when I look at the houses in my area, their mortgage rates for a 15-year are definitely above that 35% that we want to be in. So it's more like the 45%. And so I've had some friends tell me, hey, why don't you just go ahead and bite the bullet and do it? Why don't you just go ahead and, you're already really frugal, go get frugal a little bit more so we can start building equity. I really didn't want to do that because there's a lot of risk in that. If I've got a lot of my income tied up in housing, then there's no other savings. There's no other building an emergency fund. If I ever have an emergency and I've got to pull out of my emergency fund, how am I going to build that back up? I've got no additional income to throw in there. So I really want to stay under that 35%. With that being said, I also don't want to go into a 30-year. Some people tell me, hey, dude, just go into a 30-year. That way you're in that 35% of your take home. And if you do the math, you're almost paying double, if not more. I saw a $200,000 house, a 15-year versus a 30-year. I was paying $100,000 more if I went with a 30 than a 15. Wow. So I'm going to do a 15 no matter what. That's just something my wife and we talked about. We want to save that money in the long term. So we think it's best to wait. Right now, we're just saving for a down payment. We're kind of seeing how the market's going. And a lot of people are telling me, hey, dude, people are buying houses. Interest rates are really low. It doesn't matter because we can't afford it. And that's one thing that people need to think about is the right time to buy is when you can afford it, not when anybody else is telling you anything. Now, when your real estate agents, hitting up your email saying, dude, you need to be buying right now. It's not the case. You buy when you can afford it. So what are your thoughts?
No, I agree. I agree with that. As far as like from a monthly perspective, like that's really good. Like you want to stick with that, kind of that 35% range. I'd also say like another thing I've been thinking about, it's just the risk with the house. Like, man, it's a lot of upside. Like you talked about building equity, but also there's just some risk of, hey, what if your roof leaks? What if your AC unit or water heater goes out? Like those are just big expenses that I know my wife and I aren't prepared to cover right now.
Yeah.
So even renting, it's difficult just seeing that money kind of go out the door. Without us building equity. That's definitely like, we're looking forward to that day when we have a mortgage and we can actually start building some equity in something with our monthly payments. But just covering that risk too, it's been a big factor for us because, hey, if something breaks, that's on the apartment complex to cover.
And that's the thing. Murphy's Law is if it can't go wrong, it will go wrong. And right. I promise you it's going to go wrong. And the moment you buy a house, more is going to go wrong. Yeah. My dishwasher goes out, a TV went out, although they didn't cover that. We had to cover that emergency fund. I consider that emergency. The washing machine went out. We've got a buzzing that had to be fixed. There's just so much stuff that could go wrong. AC unit went out one time and I was racking up those expenses. And in my mind, I'm like, that would have wiped out my entire emergency fund. And since I'm renting, didn't have to touch it.
Yeah.
And honestly, when you're renting, don't think it's a waste. You're paying to live. You're paying for a month to stay there. So don't think renting's a waste. Sure, in the long run, owning a home is cheaper, but in the short term, if you're trying to save, don't be ashamed of renting.
Yeah. And I think it's a good goal as well. To want to get to the point where you could afford a house. I think we just kind of rush into it and feel, once we kind of, get out of that, usually get people to get out of college, get a job, and then it's get a house. And so I think we feel that rush. And so I'm trying, it's tough learning contentment. About my wife and I are trying it, of just saying, okay, we'll do it when we're ready, not when someone else tells us that we need to, or when we feel like, we need to do it. Let's make sure the numbers add up and we can cover any other expenses. We don't have to cover everything that could possibly happen, but at least enough of the stuff that we expect can happen.
Yeah.
And then enough, as you said, on a monthly basis, so it's not taking up our whole paycheck just to cover that. So no, definitely agree.